In 1519, a 19-year-old from Ghent became ruler of the most powerful empire the Western world had ever seen. His name was Charles, and through centuries of dynastic marriage, political genius, and sheer historical accident, he would inherit a crown that united Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, a superpower so vast it would take months simply to ride from one end to the other. What happened next would reshape the face of Western civilization forever. In a single extraordinary year, the House of Habsburg achieved something no dynasty before it had ever managed. Through a combination of strategic marriage, timely death, and ruthless political maneuvering, it fused two of the most powerful political entities in the Western world, the Kingdom of Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, under a single ruler. This was not merely a transfer of crowns. It was the birth of a superpower. It was the moment Europe stopped being a collection of competing kingdoms and became, however briefly, something resembling a continental empire. And at the center of it all stood a young man from Ghent who had never even visited the lands he was about to rule. To understand how this happened, we must travel back centuries to a modest fortress perched on a hill in what is now Switzerland. Around the year 1020, a nobleman named Radbot of Klettgau built a castle and gave it a name that would echo through centuries of history, Habsburg, meaning, historians believe, either Hawk's Castle or a reference to a nearby river ford. It was a small beginning for what would become one of the most powerful dynasties in Western civilization. Radbot's grandson Otto II was the first to formally take the castle's name as his own title, and from that modest act of naming, a dynasty was born. For 2 centuries, the Habsburgs were regional players, counts and dukes expanding their reach through the twin engines of medieval power, war and marriage. In 1273, a pivotal moment arrived. Count Radbot's 7th-generation descendant, Rudolf, was elected king of the Romans, the first step toward imperial authority. Rudolf was shrewd. When the Habsburg Dynasty went extinct, he seized the opportunity. After defeating Ottokar II of Bohemia at the Battle on the Marchfeld in 1278, he appointed his sons as Dukes of Austria and moved the family's power base to Vienna. The Habsburgs had found their home. They would not leave it for 6.5 centuries. From Vienna, the dynasty constructed something extraordinary, not through conquest alone, but through an almost scientific application of dynastic marriage. While other noble houses fought wars to acquire territory, the Habsburgs negotiated betrothals. Their famous Latin motto, often attributed to them though historians debate its precise origins, captured the strategy perfectly. Let others wage war, but you, happy Austria, marry. By the late 15th century, this philosophy had produced results that no battlefield could have delivered. Emperor Maximilian I, Charles's grandfather, arranged a series of marriages that stitched together Burgundy, Spain, and the Habsburg heartlands into a single dynastic web. His son Philip the Handsome married Joanna of Castile, daughter of the legendary Ferdinand and Isabella. Their children would inherit everything. The mechanism of this inheritance was staggering in its complexity. When Joanna and Philip's son, Charles, was born in 1500 in the Flemish city of Ghent, so thoroughly Flemish in his upbringing that he was known simply as Charles of Ghent, he was already heir to a cascade of titles. His maternal grandparents, Ferdinand and Isabella, had unified Spain and launched the conquest of the Americas. His paternal grandparents, Maximilian and Mary of Burgundy, controlled the wealthy Low Countries and held the keys to the Holy Roman Empire. When Ferdinand of Aragon died in 1516, Charles became King of Spain. When Maximilian died in January 1519, the path to the imperial throne opened. In June of that year, the 7 prince-electors of the Holy Roman Empire gathered and chose Charles as emperor. He was 19 years old. The young emperor was a paradox in human form. Born in Ghent, raised in the Netherlands, speaking French as his first language, he became King of Spain without speaking Spanish and Holy Roman Emperor without speaking German. He was simultaneously intimate with every culture in his empire and a stranger to all of them. His jaw, that famous protruding Habsburg chin, a genetic trait that would grow more pronounced with each generation of inbreeding, jutted forward as if straining toward a future only he could see. He was deeply religious, personally modest, and possessed of an almost inhuman capacity for administrative endurance. He would spend his reign in perpetual motion, crossing the Alps 17 times, traveling constantly between Madrid, Brussels, Vienna, and the Italian states, always chasing the next crisis. And there were crises in abundance. The very year Charles was elected emperor, a German monk named Martin Luther was nailing his grievances to the door of history. The Protestant Reformation exploded across the German states like a wildfire, threatening to tear apart the religious unity that gave the Holy Roman Empire much of its ideological justification. Charles, a devout Catholic, found himself caught between his genuine faith and the political reality that many of his most powerful German princes had embraced Lutheranism. To suppress them entirely would mean civil war. To tolerate them was to compromise everything he believed. The Diet of Worms in 1521, where Charles famously confronted Luther face to face, crystallized this impossible contradiction. Luther refused to recant. Charles refused to yield. The schism became permanent. Meanwhile, to the east, the Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Magnificent pressed against the borders of Christendom with terrifying force. In 1529, Ottoman armies reached the walls of Vienna itself. Charles was fighting on every front simultaneously, against Protestant princes in Germany, against the Ottomans in the east, against France in Italy, and against the endless administrative demands of a Spanish empire that now stretched from Mexico to Peru. The sheer scale of what he governed was without precedent in Western history. The throne of the Holy Roman Empire was continuously occupied by Habsburgs from 1440 onward. Now it was merged with the most powerful colonial empire on earth. For ordinary people living under this vast Habsburg umbrella, the Union of 1519 was both a source of protection and a burden. Spanish silver from the Americas flowed into Habsburg coffers, funding armies that kept the Ottomans at bay and the trade routes of Europe open. But those same armies needed feeding, supplying, and paying. Taxation in the Low Countries grew crushing. Flemish merchants who had thrived under Burgundian rule found themselves subordinated to Spanish imperial priorities. In the German states, peasants caught between Protestant reformers and Catholic emperors faced violence from all directions. The great union of crowns that looked so magnificent from the heights of power felt, from the ground, like the weight of the world pressing down. Among the lesser-known details of this extraordinary moment is the sheer improbability of its occurrence. Charles's mother, Joanna, was still alive in 1519. Indeed, she would live until 1555. Known to history as Joanna the Mad, she had been declared mentally unfit to rule, confined to the castle of Tordesillas in Spain, where she remained a prisoner for decades. Whether her condition was genuine mental illness or a politically convenient diagnosis imposed by men who wished to control her inheritance remains a subject of heated historical debate. Her father, Ferdinand, had used her supposed incapacity to rule Castile in her name. Now her son, Charles, inherited what had effectively been taken from her. The most powerful empire in the world was built, in part, on the dispossession of a woman who may simply have been inconvenient. What the Habsburg moment of 1519 reveals about human civilization is both inspiring and deeply troubling. It demonstrates with crystalline clarity how much of history turns not on the will of peoples, but on the accidents of biology, on who married whom, on which heirs survived childhood, on the timing of deaths. It raises profound questions about legitimacy. By what right does a 19-year-old from Ghent rule over millions of Spaniards, Germans, Flemings, Italians, and indigenous Americans who never chose him? The Habsburg answer was divine right. God had arranged these inheritances, and to question them was to question God. It was a powerful argument. It was also, ultimately, insufficient. The empire Charles built did not hold in the form he had imagined. In 1556, exhausted and ill, he abdicated, splitting his domains between his son Philip II, who took Spain and the Americas, and his brother Ferdinand, who took the Holy Roman Empire. The family split into Spanish and German-Austrian branches, though they maintained close relations and continued to intermarry for generations. The Holy Roman Empire itself endured, Habsburg-ruled, until Napoleon's armies finally extinguished it in 1806. Today, the legacy of 1519 is visible everywhere European history has left its mark. The borders of modern Europe, the religious map of Germany, the relationship between church and state, the very concept of multinational empire, all bear the fingerprints of that moment when a teenager from Ghent became master of half the world. The current head of the Habsburg family, Karl von Habsburg, lives and works in modern Europe, a continent that has spent 5 centuries grappling with the consequences of what his ancestor built. The European Union itself, with its dream of unity across ancient national boundaries, echoes in strange and secular ways the Habsburg vision of a continent governed by shared institutions rather than perpetual war. The lesson of 1519 is not simply that power can be accumulated through clever marriage. It is that the systems humans build to organize themselves, empires, dynasties, unions of crowns, are always more fragile than they appear from the outside, and more consequential than anyone intends. Charles V set out to defend Christendom and ended up fracturing it. He sought to unify Europe and ended up creating the fault lines along which it would bleed for centuries. And yet, standing at that crossroads in 1519, holding those impossible crowns, he also demonstrated something remarkable about human ambition, that we will always reach for more than we can hold, and that in the reaching, we sometimes change the world forever.